Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McCusick, and we're here for this week's Friday Morning GM with co-host Vas Laricos. Vas, how you doing?
I'm doing okay, Ken. Still trying to get over this Ravens loss in the AFC Championship game. Not too excited for this upcoming Super Bowl, to be honest with you. Not as much as usual, but the beat goes on, and I'm starting to get a little bit more excited and intrigued by how this offseason is going to play out for the Ravens.
Going to be, it always is. The offseason is always critical. You need to do well every year, but this is one where the Ravens are going to have a lot of turnover, and it's something they're going to have to manage very carefully in terms of cap, in terms of draft capital. We're going to get a lot of that. Ultimately, the master is the cap. That is the ultimate master. So if you want to be someone whose opinion is respected in terms of what the Ravens should do this offseason, you must start with that. Okay, you have to bring that to the table. I don't want to hear we need to go after X receiver or X running back or this defensive lineman or this edge rusher because we got to have him and he would add so much. Look, that's a part of the call, but honestly, the cap considerations of it are much bigger.
100%. I believe the cap underpins the entire conversation, the entire decision-making process. And the Ravens are in a little bit of a different situation than they have been after borrowing a little bit over $30 million between not likely to be earned incentives and void years that they're going to have to repay at some point. Are they going to repay? How much are they going to repay this upcoming season? And how much are they going to push off onto even further into the future? That is really an interesting decision for me because DaCosta and Ozzie for the last decade have really tried to prevent this type of situation from happening, and it did. And now how do they decide to proceed?
A lot of teams coming out of the COVID years where the cap did not grow at the pace expected, and all teams were borrowing against the cap basically during that COVID period. Being a successful team during that means they're in a worse cap position. Teams like the Browns and other teams, they actually came in, and the Browns shot themselves in the foot with Deshaun Watson. But the Browns coming out of the COVID years were in pretty good shape going into that, and a lot of the lesser teams in the league were. The real miracle team is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to get away with Baker Mayfield at quarterback on the kind of salary that he did. They brought in basically a cheap bargain option, and it worked out. There's not much more you can do for your franchise than having that happen.
Yeah, I think it was about $6 million, and they got playoff caliber play from him. It worked out for them. It worked out for the Rams. I think the Rams retooled pretty quickly to have a pretty good season. The place I don't want to be is where the Saints are, where you're playing with a short deck for an extended period of time, just trying to get into the playoffs or get into the mix and see if you get lucky with no real chance or a very slim chance of actually advancing in the playoffs. So I know we differ a little bit on strategy, but regardless, it is a decision that's going to have to come from the top and will impact every other decision they make.
Right. Well, let's talk about the Ravens' biggest move this offseason. The single biggest offseason piece is how they handle the Justin Madubuike situation. He's the reason that's true is he's the one player who would be franchised and has a value north of what that franchise tag is worth. That's a very important point because it's tough to lose Patrick Queen, but if they paid Patrick Queen the franchise tag, they'd regret it. Already in terms of even a single year. And there wouldn't be a taker, I don't think, to bring Patrick Queen off that they could get significantly more anyway than a third round pick in 2024, which is now kind of 2025, which is the cap on the compensatory pick they'll get for Queen.
Yes, very good point. So approximately $20 million cap hit for the tag, for Madubuike on the tag, and his market value, according to Spielberger, is $23 million. So there is a savings there. The last time the Ravens used a tag, I believe, was Matthew Judon, who had actually played out the season on the tag and then walked. And I think he actually got paid a little bit less than the tag amount that year. But that was unusual sort of market forces driving his price down, I think.
No, they used it, of course, on Lamar last year, but he didn't play on the tag, and that is an important thing. That the difference between the Ravens don't want Justin Madubuike to play on the tag because it will really hamstring him. In fact, they really don't want him on the tag at all if they can avoid it. So if they can sign him before the tag date comes, that's the optimal situation. And I'm sure those discussions are going on right now, or have already begun. Let me put it that way. They're not talking right this minute necessarily. But anyway, the other thing about this is if they do have to tag him, then he becomes at that moment, because you have to be under the cap at all moments throughout the year. They have to readjust money in order to make him fit. And it also delays them from making any other moves until he's signed. And Madubuike's agent may use that as leverage against the Ravens in trying to make something happen. So the Ravens will be highly incented to process him off that tag quickly or trade him, which is yet another possibility.
Yes. Personally, and there's been a lot of discourse on whether the Ravens they have to keep Madubuike no matter what. That seems to be a common sentiment among the fan base. It's really hard to quantify his value because he is an elite finisher as far as getting the quarterback on the ground, but he's not an elite, first pressure generator necessarily. Yeah. So what is that worth, and how would that be impacted if you don't have a Jadeveon Clowney in the backfield pushing quarterbacks into Madubuike's range all the time? He could have a precipitous drop-off in production next year if there isn't that edge pressure. So I probably am in the camp at this point of the tag and the trade of Madubuike. You have a certain limit to how many cornerstone players you can have on your team at the same time. And they have some other players coming up in the pipeline, such as Kyle Hamilton, that are going to, and potentially Odafe Oweh and several others that are going to need to be paid. It's tough to find a penetrating three technique. There are not as many defensive quality D linemen coming out of the draft in recent years. But I personally think that $23 million is too rich for Madubuike's impact on the game.
I'm with you on that, and I think tagging and trading makes a lot of sense. If the Ravens are going to make a big move in terms of draft capital, it's the only way. It's very hard to say exactly where Madubuike fits in terms of the incremental draft value, but the Ravens will have a good handle on that by the time they put the tag on him. I think at the very minimum, okay, let's put this in some game theory terms here. They would not want to take the risk if the only return was maybe a third round pick for trading him. And I think it is higher than that. I think they'll get more than that even with him tagged, because other teams, and we saw, the Bears basically do that this year, acquiring Montez Sweat so they could sign him long term, because the Bears don't have any success in the offseason signing players when they have other options. So they have a hard time signing guys at the top of the market. There are other franchises as bankrupt as the Bears are that Madubuike could end up going to that have money. And so it's, I don't know where the Carolina Panthers are right now in terms of money, but that's the kind of organization. It would be what we would have called a second division team in the ancient days of 8-team baseball leagues, where you if you're the teams in the fifth through eighth place are always getting a lot of retread talent from the better teams. A situation like that is possible, obviously, for Madubuike. And, that's the team who's going to give him the money he wants, and he has a chance to be on the developmental uptick of a team there. But I don't think the Ravens will take the risk if the return were only the third. It's not enough to improve from a 3rd and 25 to a 3rd and 24, even though it'd be very valuable for the team, to take the risk of him ending up playing on the tag because you can't work out a deal.
Sure. And tying up that money, and just another piece to add on to that, with the void year structures, if they do opt to bring back any of the players that have void years, they need to make that decision soon, in the next 2 weeks, I believe, according to Brian McFarland, to reap the benefits of deferring that void money throughout. So you don't want to be cash strapped throughout the entirety of free agency, especially if you have to make all these moves, because then when that value signing comes along, you don't have the money to make that happen. So it is a tough spot to be in. I do think that you could probably net a second round pick, and if you can net a 2024 second round pick as opposed to a 2025 third round compensatory pick, that is worth tying the money up for a period of time.
Yeah, and I would agree. I think that's my price tag too. I don't think it's impossible. There's a team out there that would trade a low first for Madubuike. I just don't know who that is, because the low first picks are on teams that, generally speaking, have spent their cap to get into the playoffs already. I don't know. I don't know what team it would be that might fit into that category.
Yeah, I don't either. I haven't studied the cap too, or the teams that have so much space, or how much space. There's a few teams with a ton of space. I know that, but not a whole lot. I think you probably try to get into the top half of the second round, where sometimes you get those first round picks, talents that fall, and that's also where the teams that have the money usually reside.
Yeah. Yeah. Good possibility of doing that. Also, I think a good possibility that the Ravens this year, and we didn't include draft capital in our list of things, but trading down into the second round is definitely a possibility. The value of the 5th-year option at the end of the first round is generally speaking lower. And I say that after the Ravens, reap the benefits of Lamar Jackson and the 5th-year option on him, but you don't typically get a impact player of that type, and much less a quarterback at the end of the first round. So it's much less likely. And you're forced into more difficult 5th-year options, which we could just hit on here real quickly, like the Ravens have with both Oweh and Bateman coming up. Now, you had the numbers for those two.
Yes, $12.2 million for Odafe Oweh and $13.8 million for Rashad Bateman. So just on that point, quarterbacks definitely 5th-year option is a beneficial. Not some other positions, I don't really think it is.
Right.
You're paying a lot of money for just a 1-year option with no value, no option to defer the cost or anything.
Yeah, in particular, if you're getting a guard or a center towards the end of the first round, the 5th-year option is garbage because it's graded in with the other offensive linemen, and so you're paying tackle money for a guard or a center, and so the Ravens that'll come up with Tyler Linderbaum. They're going to need to re-sign him long term earlier than you might expect, which is another cornerstone player if you want to do that. Who then has to be you don't really have the value of the 5th-year option to look forward to.
And because he made the Pro Bowl, also he will receive a bump. Yeah. So those aren't low numbers by any means. I mean, they would rank among the top handful of contracts on the team as far as annual salary per year. I am in favor of Odafe Oweh. I think he's on the upward trend. He's on the upward trajectory. I don't know what it is about the Ravens flock, but they seem to really undervalue or dislike a lot of their edge rushers through the years. I don't know if they're comparing everyone to Terrell Suggs, and if you're not Terrell Suggs, you're not worth anything or what, but Zadarius Smith, Judon, Oweh, a lot of the guys.
Bowser.
There's not as many – Bowser, yeah. There's not as many quality – edge rushers as there are receivers. Receivers seem there's a plethora of them every cycle, it seems. Both that struggle with injuries. I think Bateman, although I do think a second wide receiver, top caliber wide receiver, is vital, I don't think he's earned that, and I don't think he's earned 13.8 quite yet.
Yeah, I don't, and obviously they have to make the decision now. And Bateman's coming off a really bad step back year in some ways. I was looking at the metrics, preparing to do the wide receiver review show, and Bateman, as it's great separation metrics I've been seeing all year, which lend credence to the notion that Lamar is just not looking his way. But the next gen stats did not show separation for him. He's maybe in the 30th percentile of separation. In terms of yards per target, he was not good. In terms of passer rating, throwing to him, he was terrible this year with 3 picks going his way. So Bateman is at a crossroads season, and I think one of the big things they're going to have to do is figure out how he gets more practice time with Lamar during the offseason. And some guys, you meet a whole bunch of people in the same walk of life, and some of them it's natural for you to hang out with, and that thing you have things in common with, and you enjoy some similar activities that are outside of football. And it may be that Bateman and Lamar just don't have that obvious connection, or it's Bateman doesn't make time in the offseason for it, whatever it may be.
But he's hurt. I think the problem is he's been hurt in the offseason more than anything.
That could be. And if that's all it is, then this offseason should be a good one for him, working with Lamar. And we saw it really paid dividends for both Beckham and Flowers in a big way this offseason. So this is a great time to spend some freaking time in Lamar's guest house, wherever that is, and enjoy some time playing together during the offseason. Okay, but 50-year options we were talking about. So I'm a no also on Bateman, and I'm a yes absolutely, resoundingly on Oweh. And I think Oweh is a guy they want to try and sign long term as well. He would be a cornerstone choice for me. It'll be interesting to see how they get that done, because I think his actual cornerstone contract number might be about that, or maybe even a little bit less, if they're talking about how much he can make per year. And I think, prior to the fifth year, you still have some of that divisible benefit on the table. Once he plays the fifth year, then he knows he's got free agency looming quickly, and he won't, have the concerns about injury. Obviously, once the season is over, all that divisible benefit goes away. So now would be the time to. I'm sorry. Now, after it could be after year 4, could be the time to make the deal.
That's when I would do it, because I do think he still has a little bit to prove as far as just being able to handle a larger snap share, staying healthy, and still producing at the same time. He's done all three, but not necessarily congruently. So I would say let's play out this next year, see where he is, and then get him on a long-term deal, hypothetically, a little bit below market value, because he has that divisible benefit, as you said.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll hopefully look forward to that one. I do hope he's part of the long-term plan there. The next big position is probably the Ravens' biggest draft concern, which is at left tackle. The Ronnie Stanley situation right now, he played well enough in the last few games. I thought he played reasonably well in the postseason games, and I thought he played well at the very end of the season as well, that I kind of switched sides of the fence, actually switched from being right on the fence to I now think he's a keeper for the $8 million savings you could have in 24. Where are you on that?
I think he needs to take a haircut. That he can earn back through playing time, but his number's too high. He hasn't played. He hasn't been reliable enough, and he did play better, but still not anywhere near that kind of cap hit down the stretch. I think either way, left tackle is at the very top of the draft board, draft needs.
Yeah.
And I hope in an ideal world, you can have Ronnie come back with a pay cut that he can earn back based on playing time, and have that first round left tackle waiting in the wings to either take over if Ronnie is ineffective, or after 1 year of seasoning, become the full-time starter.
So there's a lot of companies out there, and I'll give you a corporate example of why going to Ronnie and asking him to take a haircut might be very counterproductive. There's a lot of companies out there. I had the situation arrive with an audio visual company that had done a very bad install at my house. They completely messed it up and took forever, and they did some things. And my reaction through some very frustrating discussions was to threaten legal action. And as soon as they did that, they won't talk to me anymore. They're like, you need to talk to our legal department because that's our policy, kind of thing. And unfortunately, I think that is part of what may happen with Ronnie Stanley. If you go and ask him to take a haircut, he's like, well, you guys have the right to release me, and you'll get $8.3 million back against the cap. I can get my new start somewhere else, and we can part ways on a mutual basis. And he doesn't have to play it hard acrimonious. He can play it soft acrimonious and just say no way on a pay cut with incentives. And unless there was something, maybe there's something else he can gain from that. The Ravens gain from maybe restructuring the contract to include some void years, say, pushing even more money out, and Stanley gains in terms of he can earn more than what he loses with reasonable, incentive. There could be something like that could work out. But it's also, as soon as you kind of threaten it, you got to be ready for him to not play for this team in 2024, ready to make that decision as part of the things. And, with the 30th pick overall, I don't think they're going to get an immediate ready solution at left tackle.
Agreed. It's tough. Even top 15 to left tackles sometimes take a year. There has been some conversation about that from other sources. I think Michael Lombardi, who's a former general manager at National, was on one of the radio shows talking about that he thinks that Ronnie's a prime pay cut candidate. We'll see. We're going to see. I think DaCosta didn't, kept his cards close to the vest as far as that at the end of the season press conference. It's a big cap hit. They took that chance with Ronnie where they guaranteed more than traditional to have him sign for a little bit less And obviously 3 days later, he
out.
has that catastrophic injury, and here we are. So I hope they do kind of opt against those type of deals, contract structures in the future. Obviously, you can't do it with a quarterback, but other positions, just because you don't want to be in this spot where you're kind of stuck in the middle of a no-win situation.
I do want to throw this in for my own offensive line grading, which differs from PFF because I have a higher weighting on the penalties. Okay. Ronnie Stanley for the whole season had a raw score of 0.63 with adjustments that would still put him in pretty much the high D range or even the mid D range for the season. It was not a good year by any cut. And to put that 0.63 relative to other tackle play, Moses was at 0.77, which would put him in the middle of the B range. And McCary was at 0.70, which was substantially better than Stanley. So there's no way I can look at this and make it be a good year. Even Daniel Fa'alele, who just came around at the end of the year after basically being an F-level player for a year and a half for the Ravens, was at 0.62, just 0.01 behind Stanley for the year. That should scare the hell out of you, in terms of where he is. So I do think his play at the end of the season means he's a good chance to take. I think that basically the way he looked on the field in terms of being more mobile, attacking the pass rushers outside of the pocket more, I thought was very good. He wasn't just trying to die slowly, play after play after play. I think there were a lot of good things we saw at the end of the year from Ronnie Stanley, and it's got me on the side of do it. And I would just absolutely love it if somehow he plays the season of his life next year. The Ravens figure out a way to extend him, and it goes on to make the Ravens Ring of Honor, as seemed like it was a sure thing to happen when he signed this second deal. But it's I won't say it'll take a miracle, but I think it would be about I'm going to call it about a 90th percentile result if he were to play well enough to get extended in 2024. Where are you on that?
I'd agree. He just had so much trouble staying healthy. It's just when you have trouble anchoring, it just leads into getting your knees rolled up on, getting your ankles rolled up on, and then it just becomes a vicious cycle of injury after injury. And then you can't anchor because your knee hurts. And so then you get your ankle rolled up on. It's really a matter of health and play. I think he did some made some changes to his technique so that he could anchor, as far as maybe shifting his weight a little bit differently towards the end of the season, learning how to compensate for some of these injuries. It's just unfortunate that it's gone that way. And then, you also have questions on the right side too. I think and then both guards are unrestricted. So, Linderbaum's the mainstay, and you have kind of four questions elsewhere. You don't want to add to it, but it's really hard to say, okay, let's pay $24 million cap hit to a left tackle who had a D grade this season.
So I just from my own perspective, I don't look at that as a $24 million cap hit, because most of that money has already been spent.
Right.
Okay. So they got $16 million in prorated crapola that they can't get rid of, but they have $8 million that they can actually save against that cap by cutting him. So the question really is, can you get a 1-year solution at left tackle for $8 million that would be as good as Ronnie Stanley? I think, on balance, I think the answer is probably no as of right now.
Yeah. Most likely. I mean, offensive line scarcity is tremendous throughout the league. And it is, unfortunately, I believe, and on the right note on this topic, one of the better offensive line, especially offensive tackle draft crops coming out in recent memory by the early analysis.
Yeah, and some good coaching on this team on the offensive line, which I think has helped them to consistently have players who are above the replacement level, even as their backups. So, when they've had McCary as a left tackle backup, he's not the guy you want to go through a whole season with. You don't want to face that down the barrel of that, but he's a hell of a backup in terms of being a decent guy. Fa'alele seems like he might be becoming that on the right side. I don't trust him to play left tackle. And then we Moses having the big year is just a godsend in terms of it's not a question at all whether he'll be back in 24. Not to me anyway. Right. But they have probably a 2-year solution they need at each of the two positions. They're going to need to draft a right tackle, a tackle each year, but a guy who can play left tackle certifiably in this first year, and then a guy who can replace Moses next year, unless they get to a point where they want to extend him.
Moses.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like the idea of Moses and Faalele on the right side. This is the third year of Moses' 3-year contract. Most thought it was probably going to be a 2-year deal. When he signed it, he exceeded expectations that has earned that third year. Faalele also was meant to be a developmental player, and now he has a third year where he can maybe do some more of that platoon rotation system, and then he's ready next year for 2025 to be the starting right tackle. That would probably be the perfect situation as far as balancing ability, production, development, and cost all at the same time.
Right. I would agree. If Faalele could take a step forward, it would be a huge cost savings, and no doubt about that. Let's move to guard, where Kevin Zeitler, obviously a big issue, coming off a contract. He wanted an extension. I think he's the kind of player, I think the Ravens would probably have wanted to do it before the season started, but they just could not find a way to make the money work out. And some of it's for Zeitler, some of it's for him, and some of it's also the desire not to get left holding the old maid at the end of somebody's career. And in particular, an older offensive lineman who typically end up with these, multiple 2-year for one deals. Mason had that. Reed had it for a while. I mean, Yanda had it. They're good players, all of them, but you end up holding the bag on a year, and you kind of always know you're going to end up holding the bag on a year. It's like the last loan you make to somebody who's not really creditworthy is always going to be a bad loan.
Yeah. Well, it's almost like a void year in a way. So Spielberger projects Zeitler to make $15 million over
Wow.
2, so seven and a half a year. And the other thing is he started slow this last year.
Yes.
But the more I think about how are the Ravens going to get over the postseason hump, I think as strong as an O-line as you can possibly build is really one of the big keys. So I know he's getting older. I know it's probably a little bit more or almost the same as he made on this last deal, but I think he made 6.5 on the last deal. So usually it goes in reverse where you're making less as you get older, 6.5 per year. I actually think I would be in favor of re-signing Zeitler for that price, personally.
It's a big commitment of cap if they do it. I'm not saying it was $22.5 million for 3 years, so $7.5 million. So this would be basically the same number over a 2-year deal. And I guess it's a lot of it comes down to if you're sure you were getting 2 years for $15 million, you can count me in on that. I'm 82% sure I'm getting 2 years. And I think, less than that, 75% sure I'm getting 2 years, because at his age, and it won't be Zeitler necessarily running out on the deal. It'll be him retiring because the injuries start to pile up and they get to be worse and worse. Or we suddenly see a precipitous play decline, which is much more likely at his age, even though, he's been a guy who's certainly maintained a very consistent level of play throughout his career.
Right. So one of the reasons why I think that's a fair price, even at his age, is because Spielberger's projecting $5 million a year for Simpson on a 2-year deal. So 2 for 10. Huh. So to me, if you're comparing Simpson for 5 versus Zeitler for 7.5, that's a no-brainer.
Easy choice. And I don't know where his basic numbers come from. If they come from PFF, they come from somewhere else. If they come from PFF, they're undercharging for Simpson's penalties. And that's the heart and soul. If you can live with Simpson's penalties, you can pay a lot for him because he's not that bad a lineman at all. He's a good backup lineman. He's an okay starter probably, even without the penalties. But then when you look at what the penalties are, they're all post snap fouls. They're which have those higher option value costs. They're holding flags, couple occasional false starts, and those are the good ones. I think there's a possibility they could bring Simpson back, but I think it's basically he'll be competing for a job instead of going somewhere. And I really don't know what the market is for him. He replicated all of the failure from Las Vegas in his year in Baltimore. In fact, I don't know if you saw this, but he had one penalty every 95.5 snaps in Las Vegas and one penalty every 95.4 snaps with the Ravens. Incredibly consistent. Incredible.
What a consistent number.
Yeah.
So Go ahead. I'm sorry.
But let's talk about the other options. Is where I wanted to go with it. So if table the 2 years for $15 million for Zeitler for a second, you've got Voorhees, who's been around the building for a year, and they must know more about him right now in terms of where he is in strength and work ethic and in the position room and whatnot, how he's growing. What do you see out of him next year?
Well, I think Voorhees is a potential starter. Obviously, you have to see. You haven't seen him on an NFL field, but he does have left and right versatility. I think Cleveland at this point might be right side only. So I would be, to kind of put my entire offensive line plan to lay it out together, Stanley on a pay cut, first round left tackle who can maybe play a little guard if you need him to first year, like a Jonathan Ogden. Linderbaum on the right side. You have Zeitler, and if not Zeitler, then Cleveland, I think, could probably be serviceable. And then you have Moses and Falele. I think that's a good group, probably equally as strong as this year's line, and also has a little bit better succession planning.
Okay, and I'm for that, and I'm using number 30 on a left tackle. I'm keeping Stanley. I don't think they'll get away with the pay cut, so I'm not planning to even have that. I'm starting Voorhees at left guard, or I'm putting him at the top of the competition at left guard. Let's put it that way. I'm bringing back Simpson if I can on something close to the vet minimum. And when I say that, I'm okay with 2 years, $4.5 million. I'm not okay with 2 years at $10 million. No way in hell. So at center, I want to keep Mustafa around if I can. But unfortunately, they've let him age a little bit on the practice squad here, and he may have a market elsewhere. But honestly, if it's between Simpson or Mustafa for a backup offensive lineman, when you get a center with Mustafa, I'm not even sure who I really want more. The Ravens made their kind of their call pretty clearly by keeping Mustafa on the practice squad all year. But I think he's actually kind of an important player because I don't want McCary playing center. I want him as a pure left tackle backup.
I believe Mustafa was activated to the active roster full time once Linderbaum had that high ankle sprain. So, I think if you can get him for that minimum, yes. If you can't, no. I mean, it's pretty straightforward for Mustafa. Ideally, Linderbaum's playing 17, 20 games. That's why you draft the first round center to play the full season. So, All
right, and I'm with Cleveland at right guard. I don't really have a problem doing it. I would like to have an additional guard backup, and I think they'll draft a guard. I think this is a year where they draft 2 offensive linemen, a left tackle, not a swing man, he might be a left tackle, might be a right tackle. We'll see if he has the feet. None of this stuff. They need left tackle traits. They need, I want to see that out of this pick anyway. And there's a lot of guys, by the way, who play left tackle in college who do not have left tackle traits. And they end up. Eichelberg from a few years ago at Miami is a guy who ended up at center. Who's the other guy from BYU who ended up at center the last couple of years? Christensen, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So,
Brady Christensen,
So they've had a variety of guys are left tackles in college because Marshall Yanda was that at Iowa, and they already know they're not going to end up there. Let's not fool ourselves. Ryan Jensen. And get a guy who is maybe if we rolled double sixes, this guy is a guy who might work out at left tackle. Anyway, they need to get left tackle traits out of the guy they're getting. Yeah,
one of the most rare skill sets in the sport. Just having somebody with that size and the power and the mobility at the same time that's why they go early, and that's why they're worth investing in.
Yeah. So, and this is a year, if you've got a 2-year plan for Stanley, I'm okay taking a developmental guy pretty high. Kelechi Osemele was a 2nd-round pick, fine left tackle. No issue with that. If it's that kind of a developmental pick, absolutely should be no issue at all. But anyway, I guess that's enough. And I think a good recap of the offensive line there, Voss, in terms of what you want to see. And I'm not far off on that.
Yeah, that's really priority one. DaCosta said it. Harbaugh said it. It has been a tenet of Harbaugh era, and it's a brilliant. I've said it before. You want to give me 3 position groups, win as many games as possible. You can have 3 that are above average. Give me quarterback, offensive line, and secondary, and I think you can win a lot of games like that.
Yeah, you're cheating and taking 2 position groups in the secondary to get 5 players, but I agree. Completely go with that. What do you want to talk about next?
So let's just stick on the offensive side, and I kind of grouped weaponry together, so to speak. Running back, going to have some attrition there. You have Dobbins, Gus are both UFAs. You have Keaton Mitchell, probably won't be ready till midseason, and Justice Hill's the only one returning. All of a sudden, there's this impetus. The Ravens need to get a 3-down back, on what I've seen on Twitter a lot. I personally couldn't disagree more. I think that's one of the lowest priorities on the totem pole on the list. It's just you're better off with the committee to spread out injury risk for multiple reasons. But I do think you need to probably add one back in the middle rounds of the draft, ideally, unless you could bring Gus back on a modest deal.
Yeah, I think that's what it would be. Gus had a really successful season despite the much lower yards per carry. Okay, so but I don't think that that's a something the Ravens can necessarily count on. They have a they have a player who I think is a good short yardage back. They have Mitchell, who hopefully will be a guy who helps them by midseason. The injury to Mitchell is just the most frustrating negative thing because he's such a great young player. Had the highest ever DVOA for any running back with 40 plus carries. It was that good a season. It was a historic season in terms of what he did. He played 6 games where he had a carry. He had at least a 21-yard carry in every game. He never had more than 9 carries in a game. Just this really limited set of unbelievably great play. And to have that snatched away of you, it's up there with the Lardarius Webb injury as one of the really debilitating career injuries. Maybe the Ronnie Stanley injury even, in terms of what it might do to his career.
Well, I hope it's speedy recovery. You go back and think, what could 5 touches, Keaton Mitchell touches, could they have made a difference in the AFC Championship game? Yeah. It's tough, it's tough, but you probably can find a Derrick Henry or somebody like that for a pretty cheap price because it's just no money out there for running backs anymore. But I still, and it's going to look like a value, but I still don't think it is long term.
Yeah, I mean, you don't want to pay $3.5 or $4 million even for Derrick Henry himself if he were available. I wouldn't want to.
Agreed.
So I'm looking out there to the bargain bin where the Ravens proved again this last year they could find incredible mercurial value in terms of Keaton Mitchell. He was a priority UDFA. I thought he should have been drafted, but if he was going to be drafted, he was going to be a 5 or a 6 probably. And the Ravens, they basically gutted it out and said, I don't think he's going to be drafted. And when the guy who had not that much difference other than context of play at the college level was Devon Achane. And he had the greatest DeVoa season ever for a running back with 100 plus carries. So when I look at those two, and I think literally what's happened in Miami and the Keaton Mitchell situation is going to change the game. I think that the impetus to go find speed, probably the impetus is always great at wide receiver, but I think it's going to really increase at running back as opposed to other factors. And people are going to be willing to accept small school backs. They're going to take flyers on speed in late rounds. And, the Ravens won't have the sort of pool of talent at the UDFA ranks and accept smaller backs a lot of times, which is really what it comes down to.
And I think this isn't a perfect comparison, but Isaiah Pacheco, 7th round pick of KC the previous year, came in, beat out Edwards-Helaire. He's not a pure speed back, but I think there's some similarities there in his playing style. So you ask the question oftentimes, Ken, if you're going to pay your quarterback and you're going to pay your middle linebacker, where are you going to save? There's no better place in all of sports, in my opinion, than running back. We've seen it time and time and time again. Number 1 rushing offense in the league with 2 UDFAs and a 3rd rounder, essentially, with Gus and Keaton and Justice. So I think they're going to be able to piece that together. Pretty much any running back in a Lamar Jackson backfield is going to be pretty effective and efficient. The other big thing, obviously, tight end, probably the strongest position group on the team entering the offseason. Wide receiver, losing or potentially losing Odell Beckham, Nelson Aguilar, and Devin Duvernay. I don't think Tylan Wallace is a wide receiver 3 caliber player at this point. I think you need to add there.
He's a UFA too, isn't he, Wallace? Or is he?
He's
year
one
3.
more.
In year 3, you're right. So, and he's a draft pick, so they actually have him signed for this year. It's not an RFA situation. All right. Well, I agree with you. I think that Duvernay has probably played his last snap in Baltimore, even though he's had a great career. We're going to talk about that on the wide receiver positional review, but he's had a great career in Baltimore as a punt returner in particular. He's been at a historic level. In terms of the running back situation, completely agree that I would not spend any more money at the position. I would be very hesitant even to spend I'd almost say no to a day 2 pick. I think whatever they spend really has to be a day 3 pick plus UDFAs. They may have a better handle on how much the pool will be depleted, but you just think it's a lot of injury risk at running back. You don't really want a guy you're depending on to carry 60 or 50% of your workload even. And when it happens and then you see injuries to players like Chubb or Mixon, it debilitates their team.
100%. And Justice Hill played 47%. I believe it was 47% of offensive snaps this last year, and he is signed. And he had his moments, and he is not unblemished player, but he is a quality player. I think he was, as Eric DeCosta said, one of the unsung heroes on the team last year.
Yeah, I agree completely. Tight end, I would not see any additional investment. It's what they might do is find a UDFA. Travis Vokolek was kind of the perfect guy to have around just in case something happened. Unfortunately, obviously he got poached, and that was that. At wide receiver, it's going to be interesting, but I actually think Nelson Aguilar should probably be a guy they try and re-sign. Remarkable season this year, by the way, and it kind of went unnoticed, but Lamar Jackson's passer rating was 122.3 throwing to him. He did a great job of finding space late on play, so he's a great extended play weapon for Lamar. Mm-hmm. We saw that any number of times. I really love some of the heady play. His talking to Lamar in the huddle and saying, I can take that safety out and clear the play for Zay Flowers for the go-ahead touchdown against the Rams. And the Rams eventually tied it, and then the Ravens won in overtime. That's just one of the plays of 2023. And I was an Aguilar detractor because he'd had 2 terrible years at New England before he came here. Didn't like giving up a 6th-round pick plus $3.25 million. He completely earned his contract.
Yeah, I agree. He was a pleasant surprise. I think you want to maintain some semblance of a veteran presence in that room, assuming that Beckham is going to depart. Spielberger says $10 million for Beckham. I think that's probably too high based off his last season, even though it's, a third, 30%, 33% less than he made. I think you want to keep tapping into that wide receiver pipeline in the draft. Take a wide receiver in the draft if you can, especially if you get an extra pick for Matabike in the top 100 pretty much every year. That's where you want to be with Bateman if you're not picking up his 5th-year option. And then Aguilar is getting a little bit older, so you Flowers, and you want to maybe have that other rookie wide receiver who's going to develop into a wide receiver 2 in time for 2025.
Yeah, I could see that. So you'd be using a 2nd or 3rd round pick at wide receiver. Then probably that's where you would advocate. I think exactly. I think that fits the needs of the team. And the other place which we can talk about next is at corner, where I think that group is very old right now. It got a lot older, unfortunately, by the fact that their young corners played like crap this year. JAD was, hurt and off the field. Pepe hurt again, couldn't get his way onto the field for a defensive snap. And then you had Ronald Darby, who comes in and plays extremely well. And you all of a sudden your cornerback room just got your effective quality of play in your cornerback room got a lot older.
Yes. Obviously not Marlon Humphrey's best year, but battling injuries, also had a couple, that George Pickens touchdown. Brandon Stevens breakout year, but did fade down the stretch. He really did. Those last 3 or 4 games he was picked on. And so anyway, as your boundary perimeter cornerbacks starting, that's great. Kyle Hamilton as your starting nickel is great, but you need depth, at least a Darby caliber, hopefully, perimeter cornerback, CB3. And you also need a safety. I think people would like to double count Kyle Hamilton as he's playing 2 positions at once. Let's be clear here. There's 5 defensive backs are starters, so you can't have four and say you're set there. So
yeah, I would start with we don't even know who Trenton Simpson is at this point. I would love to believe he's Patrick Queen. Everybody wants to believe he's Patrick Queen. If he were a 3-down player, it would be good. It would also not be terrible if the Ravens realized very quickly that they needed a dime back and Simpson is really a 2-down player, or that he has a specialized role where he only is going to play on some third downs, et cetera, et cetera. It would reduce injury risk if that were the case. And so you'd be prepared with a dime back. But I think the Ravens really need 5 safeties and not 4. I'm a big proponent of bringing back Darryl Worley. I'd love to bring back Geno Stone if the price were right. I don't think it will be. But the way this Ravens team succeeded out of a too-high shell pretty much all year tells me if you want to try and replicate that success, you're going to need to get better at safety, or going to need to try and be as good as you were at safety. And there is one big name out there that'd be really interesting, and that's Chuck Clark, who is currently unsigned, but I think would fill a really good back end. He could do 2 things for you. He could be a back end half field guy. You don't want him single high, but back end half field guy. And he can also be a dime back, just as he made his mark really in 2019.
I agree, and I definitely agree with your point bringing back Darryl Worley. I thought he played very well as a high safety. Geno Stone, according to Spielberger, a 2-year contract for $13 million, so 6.5.
Ooh.
That's, I think that's it's rich for, even though technically he's a starter. I think if he was a better run defender in addition to the ball hawking, I'd be more on board. But that's high. I think in a perfect world, you bring back Worley, you maybe look at Smith as well. You draft a safety in somewhere in the middle rounds. And I'd like to get a corner on day 2, a corner that can play on the boundary. You can never have enough corners. You don't know what the cornerback room is going to look like 2 years from now, with Stevens entering his final year and Humphrey potentially declining a little bit and might, potentially could be a cap casualty down the road.
I think all excellent points. I would go corner day 2 if they have their guy. And again, you want to be as flexible as possible because some talent's just going to fall in your lap at some point relative to your board, and you want to be able to take it. And that might mean a running back gets drafted too early. It might mean a cornerback gets drafted too late. I did feel in this last draft, they really chased the value of corners all the way down until they ended up with Caillou Blue Kelly, and they cut him. And they did not have a good handle on what the CB market was, or they just weren't able to get used to it. But they, to DeCosta's credit, he completely filled that room effectively. And to McDonald's credit, he used some lesser players, frankly, and minimized their weaknesses by having that great safety group.
For sure.
I would add one thing about the safety group. I think that's a place where the Ravens have consistently proven they can get value with lesser picks and UDFAs and also cast-offs from other teams. A player like Adams this year is a guy who's played free safety his whole career. He'd be fine in a split field role as of right now if he's working with the team from the beginning and really understands the system. He's not going to take a long time to do it. You have other guys who are UDFAs. Lucien was learning the position this year. He might be a guy the Ravens bring back on a futures deal, and he's again competing in camp for a spot. But the Ravens are so good at finding guys late, and their history of finding dime backs and second safeties in the 6th round, 7th round, and UDFA ranks is so good. I don't even think you really need to go too high. And the free safety skill set, while there is an elite group that you really got to pay with a 1st round pick, and they got some of that with Hamilton, in terms of those instincts. You can also get it really cheap if you've got a player who's physically limited like Geno Stone in round 7.
Yeah, I agree. I think I'm not concerned about how the Ravens have proven time again that they know how to properly draft and develop and restock that position. Where are you on Arthur Mollett and Ronald Darby, the chances of bringing them back to unrestricted free agents?
I would love for Darby to be back under some way. I don't know currently what his situation with the team, how far apart they are in terms of numbers or expectations or whatever, but his season was so good. I think they've got to consider it at least. Rock Yassin won't be back. I don't think. I don't think he's got anything left in the tank at this point. But we'll see. Physical cornerback. Somebody else may want him, but the Ravens. I think actually might have fit the Ravens scheme pretty well this year, but he never got on the field because Darby was just a lot better. Right. It was surprising that Darby played as well, and I just don't have a sense. What's the OTC valuation on him, by the way?
I have that one in front of me, but
I'll go look it up. Give me your thoughts, and I'll go look it up.
I like the idea of bringing Darby back if you can get him for, a little bit more than a relatively bargain type of contract, like a Rock Ya-Sin contract that he had last year. I think Rock got 3.5. You can get Darby for somewhere between 2 and 4. I'd be on board with that. Yeah.
Okay, so that's an AAV on a 2-year deal, maybe, or you trying to get him for a 1-year deal with some void years?
I'd probably do 1 year just because he's had that injury history. I don't want to get caught holding the bag on the cornerback. And let's see here, $2 million. OTC valued him at $2 million last year. Yep.
That's an extreme undervaluing. He's 5th in the entire league in yards per target of guys who had 300 or more coverage snaps. He was outstanding within the Ravens system. Mollett, much more of an average NFL guy, fits the Ravens, persona in some ways. But I don't want to. I honestly, if anything, I want Hamilton playing more snaps at nickel, more non-traditional snaps in that slot role than what he has already. So I kind of see whoever they get for a quote unquote slot corner role is kind of a backup position. So if you're, from one sense, Mollett is perfect if he's a vet min guy again. Provides you roster fungibility at the end, and that could be valuable. In another sense, he's an older guy. And if you want a truly different skill set from Hamilton, you might want a faster, twitchier, younger guy. Pepe so far has not cut it. He'll be a crossroads, but Ardarius Washington, might be the guy who can play that position when they don't want Hamilton there, in situations where they don't want Hamilton there.
I agree. That's exactly. I would have Hamilton and Ardarius Washington, and maybe a late round or UDFA rookie fighting in the mix in training camp. That's probably the perfect situation for the nickel. And you do something to bolster the back end. You give yourself some more depth on the perimeter, and maybe a succession plan there. That's pretty much what I had as far as the secondary. You want to talk about Patrick Queen? We can expected to make $18 million a year over 4 years, according to Spielberg.
I hope he gets every dollar of that. And I guess probably I hope it's with an NFC team too. Just to lower the risk of what could happen. Yeah, he certainly made a lot of progress. And I don't even want to get into the minutia of when he made this progress relative to Roquan, but I'll just say it was an enormous overdraft for him at number 28 overall, with the pain and suffering the Ravens had to take in his first 2 years. It definitely, it was not a good thing for the team, and he became a better coverage player. He's a terrific coverage player this year. His responsibility set is a little bit less than Roquan's, who takes a lot deeper drops, a lot higher ADOTs on the targets he faces. With Queen, he's mostly a downhill player, and he became very good at that this year. And I think, we ought to celebrate that happened. He did a lot of good things as a pass rusher during his entire career, including some unselfish things like setting picks that he's very good at. But on the whole, I think we have to say goodbye to Patrick Queen. Probably the lowest likelihood of returning of any of the Ravens free agents.
Completely agree there. It seems that even the most anti-positional value folks among the flock have come to that conclusion. And I wouldn't be surprised if he goes with McDonald to Seattle, or maybe Denard Wilson or Anthony Weaver, somebody that kind of wants him. And I think he did kind of become a locker room leader too. So I just want to circle back on the pass rush. I know we touched on Matabike. I think we're both think that 23 is a little bit too rich. I would be in the market for a 3-tech relatively early in the draft if Matabike is not signed, to help form a new foundation along with Travis Jones. Edge rusher, I actually am probably in the minority, but I'd like to bring back Jadeveon Clowney. Spielberger projects for $9 million, 1 year for $9 million,
Ooh.
which is probably a little bit more than most want to pay. But his metrics were very impressive. And although he didn't necessarily have the counting stats, he really showed up, played 70% of the snaps, I believe, in both playoff games, and could really help make up for the loss of Matabike as a down lineman. If you then have Clowney with Owe taking a step and Ojabo returning, you can probably recreate the same pass rush.
Yeah, he led the team with 57% of snaps played during the regular season. By comparison, Owe, who missed time, obviously played 37, and Van Noy played 42, even though he didn't show up until week 4. So Clowney definitely the leader in terms of being on the field for the Ravens and being, meeting that availability concern. The guy who we haven't talked about here is Tyus Bowser. Any chance he returns?
No, I would take that $5.5 million and put it towards Clowney.
Okay.
I don't know how you leave that 5.5 on the table after you sit out an entire year when you were expected to be back for training camp at some point, and then month after month goes by. I don't know how you can depend on somebody like that at this point.
Yeah, obviously extremely disappointing season, a lost year for Tyus Bowser. I think it honestly is a wish him his best in future endeavors. It really sucks because he was one of my favorite players as a Raven. I think when we're doing this off-season thing that's just going to be the main historical thing I do this year will be once there was a player, and I want to think about second-tier players for the Ravens who you really like. Tyus Bowser would probably be mine in terms of a guy who just brought so much flexibility to your pass rush by being able to drop to cover and be very effective there and as a pass rusher. And it's a really sad day, but I would agree with you. I think basically bridges have been burned there. I guess we didn't really talk about this, but are bridges also burned with J.K. Dobbins at this point?
I think so. I mean, the Ravens are probably going to offer him a vet min deal, and somebody else is probably going to offer him a vet min deal, and he's going to say, the horseshoe turned upside down for me in Baltimore, so let me plan my try somewhere else at this point.
And now, Urban just signed by the Chargers as their offensive coordinator. Wait, okay. Yeah, Greg Roman. Sorry, Greg Roman. Roman or whatever he's. Yeah, Greg Roman.
James Urban was the quarterback. Yes. Yeah. Anyway.
Well, Urban and Roman, for some reason, I get those names mixed up a lot. But anyway, Greg Roman, signed again as I would have to think organizational knowledge from Ortiz. I would think there's a pretty good chance he ends up there. But we'll see if you're talking about a guy who they're going to want to try and get in on a cheap deal, but they're also going to try and sell him on the situation in the backfield. I think the only downside to him going to a place like LA is that Austin Eckler, don't know actually what his situation is for this coming year, is a guy who right now is one of their central pieces in their puzzle.
Well, I think Eckler's probably on the outs because he had a down year and he was trying to get more money. I think wasn't he on the the tag last year? The tag? Remember he was he was the organizer of the call, I believe. And then some of the other guys like Barkley still had a pretty good year.
He's a UFA. You're right.
Yeah. So I would, but they have a lot of cap issues to work through. So if I'm them, I'm moving on from Eckler. And if I'm Ortiz, I'm moving on from Eckler and trying to get Dobbins cheap and make it work that way. That'd be it. If you're rooting for them. So a couple other players, I think both of the special teams linebackers who also have a rotational role could be or should be brought back. Malik Harrison, I think, can be part of the solution as a rundown Sam and also core special teamer. And Delshon Phillips as well. If you're losing Queen, you have Simpson, and maybe he gives you a little bit extra insurance while also being another core special teamer.
Yeah, I could completely agree. I mean, if depending on how it would play out, if they lose either of their inside linebackers, first of all, if they lose Roquan, obviously it's very serious. But if they lose Simpson, it's also serious because they've got to figure out how to replace him on multiple downs if that's how they're using him. And having Malik Harrison or Phillips be a 2-down guy and then also having a dime is probably how they would go to replace that. I would be very happy with that. I'd be very happy. In fact, I think it might be even more likely if they lost Roquan that you might see Malik try and step in for 2 downs at Mike and them have one of these switching roles, which I'm not really crazy about, but you switch your will linebacker to be the Mike on passing downs and also bring in a dime for the extra thing. I'm not really crazy about doing that, particularly to a young player like Simpson, but it might be what they do.
I agree. I think maybe Delshon Phillips is the backup Mike. I think he start the game at Mike in week 17. I believe he did, and Queen was Will, even though Roquan was out. I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
And then when he got hurt in the second
he looked
half,
really good. He looked really good. Phillips looked really good in preseason, and so maybe he's a diamond in the rough kind of guy.
Yeah, he's definitely a highlight reel guy in training camp last year. He's just making a play every single day. It seemed like there, so it was great for that. But anyway, I'm all for that, and I'm all for the Ravens continuing their culture of kind of rolling 2-year deals at a small bonus to the vet minimum for these guys they really like in their system. And I don't think there's a big market out there for Phillips or Harrison. There might be other competing offers where somebody's willing to pay the same amount. But, they already know what they have in Baltimore. I think they'd prefer to stay here, to be my guess.
Sure. So that's pretty much how I see the offseason's personnel part. Obviously, there's a coaching piece to this that I think we touched on pretty well last episode. But just to, summarize where my head is after about 10 days of thinking about it, I'd bring back Zeitler, bring back Clowney, tag and trade Matabike, and draft priorities, left tackle, wide receiver, 3-tech, and cornerback.
Okay, completely agree on that. Another defensive lineman, even to get younger is important. I do think at the 3-tech that if they tag and trade Matabike, that we're going to see a breakout year from Travis Jones as a 3-tech. I think they basically might even draft another nose, stay large there, and get by with 3-techs with Williams and Jones there. I think that actually could be very good for the Ravens, but they do need to get younger on the defensive line still, even though they might have all 5 defensive linemen return if Matabike is not traded if he's not traded.
So going to be interesting. A lot of moving pieces, a lot of moving parts, but Eric DaCosta did such a great job of building last year's roster. I think he's earned the benefit of the doubt this year for sure.
And we did talk a lot about the coaching stuff. There's still some open positions on the coaching staff now. Some more have developed, I believe, since last week. Please take a listen to that episode. Give a download to it. It's last week's Friday Morning GM. The one thing I'll say is, if you're one of the guys who says, I don't give a crap about the cap, just sign X, just make it happen. There's a much more reasonable point of view when it comes to position coaches. Position coaches are pure gold. They are not related to the cap, and the Ravens got incredible value out of those guys this year with coaches like Wilson and Weaver and Chuck Smith as being a pass rush specialist. I mean, so much value that they got out of those guys. I would love to see them continue to hire another crop of them, even, and in this case, I'm just spending some of Steve Bisciotti's money for him.
That's right. And apparently, Chuck Smith will return next year, which is great.
Great
news.
I
believe that was confirmed by Zarebek. So yes, one of the best position coach hires they've made in a long time.
Yeah. All right, Voss, always a complete pleasure doing this. We're going to be moving to a less frequent schedule, so we will be having Friday Morning GM when it is hot, but we're taking a break of a week coming up this next one. So while you look for it, it won't be around. But Voss and I are still planning to do this show and looking forward to doing it with you next year, my friend. This has been one of the really pleasant experiences of content creation has been working with you on this.
Likewise, I really enjoy this every single week. Look forward to it, Ken. Thanks for having me on the network here. Anyone can follow me on Twitter, X at Vasilis Beatdown, Vasilis, and I am a author at Baltimore Beatdown blog. So, Ken, really was a pleasure, and look forward to continuing this through the off season, get into the draft season, all that fun stuff. So, definitely enjoy the Super Bowl.
That's like a little knifey dig in the side for me, but you enjoy the Super Bowl too, Dan.
I didn't mean it that way. Who are you? Out of curiosity, you any rooting interest?
I can't bring myself to root for the Chiefs, but I really don't care enough. I'm petulantly jealous of the 49ers because I think the 49ers got a much better draw on the officials. And again, I don't think we don't need to go into this because it's a case where I don't think there's anything openly malicious by the officials. I think there's something by the league that they need a better process for selecting officials for big games like this. And the fact that the 49ers got the most pro home official of all in Clete Blakeman, and the Ravens got Sean Smith, just a slap in the face. So anyway, I'm just being petulant. It's not really the 49ers' fault that they got the better draw. So I'm clearly going to be rooting for them over Mahomes.
So I'll take the other side of the coin. I'll take rooting for KC. It's better to lose to the team that was winning. You could say, oh, we were second best. Secondly, I want to ensure that DeCosta keeps the bullseye on KC because I think that's where it should be. But third, I think they also have some incentives. I think Chris Jones has a roster incentive to win the Super Bowl
that'd be
and
nice.
some other things. So there's maybe some way that you can hinder their personnel moving forward if they do win it. So
that's thinking like a GM. There is trying to figure out how can your AFC opponent get screwed on their own salary cap by, it's Ravens fans should be voting every other team's players into the Pro Bowl.
Yes.
All right. Voss, thanks so much. Other folks out there, if you'd like to be on a film study short this offseason, the new series, I just mentioned it, is Once There Was a Player. Get your picks in quickly. And I want second tier players. I don't want to do Terrell Suggs, Ed Reed, Ray Lewis. Don't do that. We're looking for who did you really like as a player and you thought they brought more to the Ravens than other people really give them credit for. So I mentioned Tyus Bowser might be my guy. Think along those lines. Who's your second tier player you'd like? DMs are always open. Send me who you want. Reserve your player, and I'll get back to you very quickly, and we'll try and work out a time. Going to be recording these pretty much all off season, so this will be some of the content on a weekly basis is in the historical off season run I usually do. Voss, I'm looking forward to a player from you too. Thanks again for coming on. Thanks again for coming on. For Voss Larico, for co-host Voss Larico, this is Ken McCusick saying goodbye. We'll talk to you in 2 weeks on Friday Morning GM.